In this video, I'm going to show you how I made lactic acid bacteria serum and tested its effect on compost made with the use of food waste. I started by thoroughly cleaning these glass bottles where I will store the lactic acid bacteria serum or labs. The first ingredient of labs is rice wash, which is the liquid byproduct of the process when you wash your rice before you cook it. So I poured the rice wash in these glass bottles and left them in a cool, dark place for it to ferment for 7 days. Meanwhile, I put holes in the buckets where I will be composting food waste in order to drain the liquid runoffs and to let air in. Afterwards, I placed the first layer of compost, which is made up of dried leaves, which was then followed by soil, and then the last layer is made up of the food waste that upon its decomposition will give lots of nutrients to the compost. After adding a little bit more soil on the top and then mixing it all up, the final product looked like this. I then watered both buckets of compost, which has to be done once a week except when it rained. However, to test the effect of the serum on compost while the labs was still fermenting, I opted to add Yakult instead, which is full of lactobacillus, to my experimental setup, which is the black bucket. This is what my initial setup looked like, with the green bucket being the control setup and the black bucket being the experimental one. Meanwhile, this is what my labs looked like after 7 days of fermentation. The next step in making lactic acid bacteria serum is filtering the fermented rice wash and then adding equal parts milk to the filtered liquid, which you will see is what I did in the footage being shown on screen. Like before, I stored the mixture in a cool, dry place to ferment for another week. This is what my labs looked like after another week of fermentation. Meanwhile, this is what both buckets of compost looked like after 10 days. At this point, both setups did not really look that different from each other, and there wasn't much difference in the smell as well. Going back to the serum, however, after around 10 days, white curds had already formed and was relatively separate from the yellow liquid, which is called whey. The whey is what is needed for labs, and so I filtered the liquid once again to further separate both parts from each other. At this stage, there was a very strong cheese-like smell, but there was no mold growth, so it can be assumed that the mixture did not spoil. I made use of the curds that were filtered out of the liquid by mixing it into my experimental setup of compost. Afterwards, I mixed equal parts brown sugar to the extracted whey, but you could also use molasses as an alternative. I then had to mix the brown sugar into the liquid thoroughly in order to dissolve it. And just like what I did for the previous 2 steps, I also stored the mixture in a cool, dry place to fully ferment and to turn it into the final product of lactic acid bacteria serum. This is what both setups of compost looked like 3 weeks after I started the project, and as you can see, I added the white curds and some whey into my experimental setup. I did add food waste throughout the 3 weeks, and so some of them haven't fully decayed yet, but it can be observed that the experimental setup was slightly more decomposed than the control one. There were also more flies in the control setup, but I would say that there was still not much difference in the smell. However, I do expect that once the final labs is added to the experimental compost, there will be a much more observable difference between both setups. Until then, this is the outcome of my individual project, and hopefully I can give an update in my subsequent videos for CWATs. Thank you for watching!